In February of 2024, in Cincinnati, I drove across town with a banker's box wrapped in a blue dish towel. The snow along the curb had turned to that gray, grainy crust that remembers every tire. My son and his wife had just moved into a new place in Hyde Park, and we were setting a small Sunday lunch, first time in their new dining room. I brought my grandmother's china, cream porcelain with a thin gold line like a whisper. We were three adults, steady voices, careful with each other. I said, "Keep them here until you find a hutch." She smiled, said, "Of course." We ate chicken salad and oranges. It felt ordinary. I thought I was making room for another generation to hold something I'd been holding alone. I remember the quiet as I carried the empty box back to my car. By late March, I would see one of those bowls on the floor, filled with kibble, and realize that some people measure worth by convenience. That night in the restaurant parking lot, months later, I would finally understand what my grandmother meant when she said, "Some things aren't meant to be shared with everyone." Ellen Markham was 56 years old when the photograph arrived on her phone. It was a Tuesday evening in late March, and the sidewalks in Hyde Park were finally clear. Snow had melted into memory, leaving only the pale salt lines that mark a Cincinnati winter's end. She stood in her kitchen, water heating for tea, when the text came through from Lauren, her daughter-in-law. "Ruby helping in the kitchen," the message read, followed by a dog emoji and a photo. Ellen tapped the image to full screen. The lab mix sat near the pantry, ears perked, tongue out in that universal expression of canine optimism. But Ellen's attention moved immediately to the corner of the frame. On the floor, just inside the pantry threshold, sat a shallow porcelain bowl. Cream-colored. A thin gold rim caught the afternoon light from the window. Ellen zoomed slightly. The glaze had that particular sheen, smooth, aged, faintly yellowed at the base where decades of careful washing had worn the surface to a softer finish. She knew that texture. She had dried those bowls by hand every Thanksgiving for 30 years. She set the phone face down on the counter. "It's nothing," she said aloud to the empty kitchen. But her hand stayed on the phone a moment longer than necessary, and when she lifted her palm, a small heat mark remained on the glass. That night, she opened her desk drawer and found the provenance card, her grandmother's handwriting in faded blue ink on a cream index card, the edges soft as fabric. Rosa M., Wedding China, 1928. 8 dinner plates, 8 salad plates, 8 bowls, 8 cups with saucers, 1 teapot, 1 sugar, 1 cream below, in Ellen's own handwriting from years ago, chip on bowl, small, left rim. She carried the card to the kitchen and placed it under a refrigerator magnet, next to a shopping list and a church bulletin. Then she filled her teacup and sat at the table until the water went cold. 2 days later, Lauren posted a short video on social media. Ellen saw it while scrolling during her lunch break at the credit union, where she had worked for 28 years before retiring. The video was 7 seconds long. No sound. Just Ruby, tail wagging, nose down in a cream-colored bowl. The bowl scraped lightly against the tile floor as the dog nudged it forward. That soft, ceramic clink. Ellen watched it once. Then twice. On the third viewing, she paused at the 2-second mark. The gold rimline was visible, thin and unmistakable. The same width as the teacup rims. The same reflective quality. She closed the app and returned to her sandwich. But an hour later, she opened her phone's note application and typed a single line, "Do not argue." By the end of that week, she had moved the provenance card from the refrigerator to a clear plastic sleeve and placed it in the top drawer of her desk, under her insurance documents. In April, the language began to change. Ellen had driven over on a Friday evening with a bag of oranges from the farmer's market and a paperback Lauren had asked to borrow. When she arrived, the house smelled like garlic and rosemary, and Lauren was pulling a roasted chicken from the oven, her face flushed from the heat. "We're still decluttering," Lauren said, setting the pan on a trivet. "Too many old things taking up space." Ellen set the oranges on the counter. "How's the unpacking going?" "We're keeping it minimal now," Lauren said. She smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. "Open shelves. Everything we use, or it goes." Ellen glanced toward the dining room. The hutch they had talked about in February, The one Lauren had measured for, the one Daniel had promised to pick up from an estate sale, had not appeared. Instead, 2 floating shelves held a small succulent, 3 mismatched candles, and a stack of paperback novels. "What about the hutch?" Ellen asked. Lauren's smile didn't falter. "We decided against it. Heavy furniture feels dated. We want the space to breathe." Ellen nodded. She helped set the table, plain white plates, smooth and modern, no decoration. During dinner, Lauren refilled water glasses and talked about a new client, a brand refresh for a local coffee roaster. Daniel scrolled his phone, half listening, occasionally offering a nod or a one-word reply. They were tired, Ellen thought. 2 demanding jobs, long commutes, a house still finding its shape. When Ellen rose to help with dishes, she opened the wrong cabinet, muscle memory from her own kitchen layout. Inside, for mismatched ceramic mugs, a stack of white bowls, 2 wine glasses. No gold rims. No porcelain. "Other side," Lauren said lightly, pointing left. Ellen moved to the correct cabinet and began drying while Lauren rinsed. Through the window, the backyard was dark except for a motion sensor light that flicked on whenever a branch moved in the wind. "You're really committing to the minimal thing," Ellen said. "It's freeing," Lauren replied. "Everyday objects should be everyday objects." Daniel appeared in the doorway, keys in hand. "I'm running to the store." "Need anything?" "Milk," Lauren said. He left without looking up from his phone. Ellen folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. She thanked them for dinner, hugged Lauren briefly, and walked to her car. As she pulled away, she glanced back at the house. The living room light was on, soft and golden. It looked like a home where people were building a life. But something in Ellen's chest had tightened, a small knot she couldn't name yet. The following week, Lauren posted about a yard sale. "Everything must go," the caption read, with a photo of folding tables covered in books, kitchen gadgets, and decorative items Ellen didn't recognize. Ellen drove by on Sunday afternoon after the sale had ended. The tables were gone, but near the curb, damp from the lawn sprinkler, lay a cardboard box lid. It was the same size and color as the banker's box she had used to transport to China in February. The blue dish towel was missing. Ellen parked, stepped out, and picked up the lid. The cardboard was soft, starting to disintegrate at the corners. She placed it in her trunk and drove home. That evening, she reread the text thread from February. Her message: "Keep them here until you find a hutch." Lauren's reply: "Of course, thank you so much." Ellen screenshotted the exchange and saved it to a new folder on her phone: Heirlooms, Documentation. By the end of April, the word minimal no longer sounded like a style preference. It sounded like a decision that had already been made on her behalf. In early May, Ellen brought a lemon tart to their house on a Saturday afternoon. She had made it that morning, using her mother's recipe: thin crust, sharp filling, a dusting of powdered sugar that looked like late snow. Ruby met her at the door, paws scrabbling on the hardwood, tail a blur. The dog led Ellen directly to the kitchen, as if trained for this specific route. Lauren was at the sink, rinsing lettuce, and waved Ellen toward the counter. "Just set it there," she called over the running water. "Smells amazing." Ellen placed the tart on a cooling rack and bent down to untie her shoe. It was an old trick, creating a reason to be low, close to the floor, where things were often forgotten or ignored. And there they were, 2 dog bowls side by side near the pantry. One stainless steel, scratched and practical. The other cream porcelain with a thread of gold circling the rim. Ellen crouched slowly, adjusting her laces. The porcelain bowl had a small chip on the lip, a divot she knew by heart. She had written about that chip in her notes 10 years ago when she packed her grandmother's apartment after the funeral. She tilted her head slightly, just enough to see the underside of the bowl. The maker's mark was faint but visible, an anchored crown with letters beneath, partially worn but unmistakable. "Need help?" Lauren asked from behind her. Ellen stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Just a loose lace." Lauren smiled. "Can you grab the dessert plates? They're in the dishwasher." "Of course." Ellen opened the dishwasher. Inside, the plain white plates, still warm, stacked neatly. No gold rims. No history. She pulled 3 out and set them on the counter. They ate at the kitchen island, perched on high stools, forks clinking softly against ceramic. The tart was good, sharp and sweet, the crust flaky. Lauren talked about a neighbor's new fence, how it blocked the afternoon sun from their tomato plants. Daniel arrived home halfway through, grabbed a plate, and stood leaning against the counter while he ate. "This is great, Mom," he said. Ellen nodded. "Glad you like it." After they finished, Ellen excused herself to the bathroom. But instead of turning left down the hallway, she turned right into the dining room. The space was small, just enough room for a table and a low cabinet against the wall. The cabinet was open-faced, no doors, just 3 shelves. On the top shelf sat 2 white ceramic trivets and a small potted fern. The middle shelf held a stack of cloth napkins. The bottom shelf was empty except for a single folded piece of cardstock. Ellen stepped closer. It was her grandmother's inventory card, the same one she had placed in the plastic sleeve weeks ago. But this wasn't a copy. This was the original, the edges soft from handling, the ink slightly faded. She recognized the small coffee stain on the back corner from 1998, when she had set it on the kitchen table during an estate inventory meeting. She picked it up, unfolded it, and read her own handwriting beneath her grandmother's script, chip-on bowl, small, left rim. The card had been on her desk. In her house. She had not brought it here. Ellen refolded the card carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Then she returned to the kitchen, thanked Lauren and Daniel for the afternoon, and walked to her car. She did not cry. She had learned years ago that tears were a luxury she could not afford in moments that required clear thinking. Instead, she drove 3 blocks, pulled into a pharmacy parking lot, and opened her phone. She photographed the card, the empty dining room shelf from memory, and then composed a short text to herself. "Card removed from my desk without permission. Photographed dog bowl with maker's mark. May 6, 3:15 p.m. She sent the text, creating a timestamp in her message thread. Then she sat in the car for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly until the shaking in her fingers stopped. By mid-May, Ellen had 12 photographs stored in a secure folder on her phone. Each one was labeled with a date, time, and location. She had also written a single directive in her notes application, just below the timestamps: "Do not argue. Build the case first." Ellen's grandmother had been a seamstress. She had kept every receipt, every fabric sample, every pattern instruction in a green tin box with a hinged lid. When Ellen cleaned out her apartment after she passed, she found 40 years of documentation, purchase orders, client names, payment records, all organized by year and season. Ellen had learned early that memory was unreliable, but paper was not. She opened the beige accordion folder she kept in her desk and created a new tab: Heirlooms, Documentation. Then she picked up the phone and called Harold Kwan, the appraiser who had helped her inventory her mother's estate 6 years earlier. Harold answered on the second ring. "Ellen, good to hear from you. I need an appraisal," she said. "Or at least a confirmation. Do you remember my grandmother's wedding china?" There was a pause. "Cream porcelain. Gold verge. Thin line. 1920s or 30s. 1928. "Yes. What do you need?" "A formal letter. Description, period, estimated value if it still exists in good condition. And if you have a photograph in your archive of a similar pattern, I'd like a copy." "I can do that. Give me 2 days." "Thank you, Harold. Are you selling?" "No. Just documenting." He didn't press. 2 days later, an envelope arrived with a typed letter on his letterhead, a small photograph of an identical tea set printed on glossy paper, and a handwritten note. Not rare, but significant. Family history carries its own value. Ellen placed the letter and photograph in a clear sleeve and filed it behind the provenance card. Then she brewed coffee and sat at her kitchen table with a folder she hadn't opened in 3 years, her estate planning documents. Inside was a bound packet her attorney had prepared after a minor health scare, nothing serious, just a reminder that preparation was a form of care. She flipped to the section titled Memorandum of Tangible Personal Property. It was a simple document, legally recognized, that outlined specific items and their designated recipients in the event of her death. Halfway down the page, she found the paragraph she had almost forgotten. Any item transferred temporarily for use or safekeeping remains the sole property of the undersigned unless specifically deeded in writing with notarized signature. Ellen read the sentence 3 times. She had never signed a deed transferring to China. She had loaned it. The exact words were still in her text thread. Keep them here until you find a hutch. She opened her phone, found the screenshot, and sent it to the printer. While it was processed, she pulled up Lauren's dog bowl video and took a screen capture of the clearest frame. That went to the printer as well. Then she printed Harold's appraisal letter and the photograph of the matching set. When all the pages had finished, she laid them out on the table in chronological order: text message, video still, appraisal, memorandum. A narrative built from paper. The next morning, Ellen drove to her bank and asked to open a safe deposit box. The clerk, a woman in her 30s with reading glasses on a chain, walked her down a hallway lined with small metal doors. She inserted 2 keys, one from the bank, one for Ellen, and pulled out a narrow drawer. "This size work for you?" the clerk asked. Ellen looked at the empty metal interior. Perfect. She signed the rental agreement, took her key, and returned the following day with a manila envelope. Inside, the printed documents, the original provenance card she had taken from Lauren's dining room, and a copy of her insurance policy that listed the china under household contents, itemized heirlooms. She placed the envelope in the box, slid it back into the wall, and turned both keys. The lock clicked softly. The sound was satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. By early June, Ellen had also made 2 additional arrangements. The first was simple. She contacted Pastor Ruth Ellison at her church and asked about reserving the fellowship hall's glass display case. The case was typically used for quilts, military medals, and historical artifacts related to the congregation. Ruth managed the schedule and the key. "What are you thinking of displaying?" Ruth asked over the phone. "Family history," Ellen said. "My grandmother's wedding china. I'd like to include the provenance card and a few photographs. Just for a month or 2-inch. "That sounds lovely. Let me check the calendar." A pause. Keys clicking. "How about mid-June? Right after the quilt show comes down." Perfect. The second arrangement took more care. Ellen called Victor Alvarez, her estate attorney and, more importantly, a neighbor and friend. They had lived on the same block for 12 years. Their children had been in the same high school. He understood her without needing lengthy explanations. "I need a family archive trust," she said when he answered. Victor was quiet for a moment. "That's unusual. What are we protecting?" "Heirlooms named in my memorandum. Specifically, items that may be subject to neglect or misuse while on temporary loan." "Has someone misused something?" "I'm creating a framework to prevent future issues." "Ellen, trust is a heavy tool for this. You could just ask for the items back. I'd like the protection of legal structure." He sighed, but she heard the smile in it. "All right. I'll draft something. Give me a week." 7 days later, she sat in his office, a small room above a frame shop downtown, and reviewed a 1-page document titled Family Archive Trust, Limited Purpose. The language was simple. Items listed in her memorandum would be held under trust terms. If an item was documented as neglected, damaged, or misused, it would revert to the trustee's custody, herself, or in the event of her incapacity, a named successor. "This is more than you need," Victor said, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe, but you'll sleep better." "Yes." He notarized the document and filed a copy with the county clerk. Ellen placed her copy in the safe deposit box, next to the envelope. On a Wednesday afternoon in mid-June, Ellen sent a text to Lauren. "May I pick up the china for cleaning and display?" "Saturday morning." Lauren replied within an hour, "Of course." "What time?" 10. "See you then." Ellen set the phone down and stared at the kitchen window. The afternoon light was soft, filtered through the maple tree in the backyard. She thought of her grandmother's hands, how they moved when she set a table, deliberate, careful, each piece placed exactly where it belonged. She spent Friday preparing. She bought 2 sturdy cardboard boxes with fitted lids, foam separators designed for dishware, sheets of unprinted newsprint, and a pair of white cotton gloves. She also stopped at a department store and purchased a 12-piece stoneware set, simple, durable, dishwasher safe. Plain white with a slightly textured rim. The kind of dishes that asked nothing of anyone. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool. Ellen, dressed in jeans and a plain blouse, pulled her hair back and loaded the boxes, gloves, and stoneware into her car. She arrived at Daniel and Lauren's house at exactly 10 o'clock. Daniel answered the door. "Hey, Mom." "Morning." He stepped aside, and she carried the boxes into the dining room. Lauren was at a yoga class, he explained, but she'd be back in an hour. "That's fine," Ellen said. "I'll just pack these up and be out of your way." Daniel helped her lift the cabinet's top shelf forward. Inside were the teapot, sugar bowl, and creamer, still intact, untouched, their gold rims gleaming in the morning light. Ellen set them carefully on the table. "Where are the plates and bowls?" she asked. Daniel glanced toward the kitchen. "We've been using them. They're just dishes, Mom." Ellen looked at him. His face was tired, the expression of someone who hadn't yet realized what he'd overlooked. "Please bring them to the dining room," she said quietly. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, he returned carrying a stack, 5 dinner plates, 3 salad plates, 2 bowls, and 2 teacups without saucers. He set them on the table. Then he returned to the kitchen and came back with the porcelain dog bowl, setting it down last. A few pieces of dry kibble clung to the gold rim. Ellen didn't speak. She pulled on the white cotton gloves, unwrapped the soft brush from her bag, and began gently cleaning each piece. The dog bowl took the longest. She worked slowly, brushing away the residue, her movements precise and deliberate. Daniel stood beside the table, watching. "I didn't think," he said finally. Ellen continued wrapping a plate in the newsprint. "I know." When Lauren arrived 20 minutes later, she walked into the dining room and stopped. Ellen had already packed the teapot, sugar, and creamer. She was sliding the last bowl into a foam sleeve. "We use those," Lauren said. Ellen didn't look up. "I'm taking them for cleaning and display. They were on loan. You gave them to me." Ellen set the bowl into the box and turned. She reached into her bag and pulled out 3 printed pages, the text message, the appraisal letter, and the memorandum clause. She set them on the table. "I placed them with you when you had no storage. I asked you to keep them until you found a hutch. I never deeded them. The insurance lists them under my name. The memorandum defines them as property held in temporary loans." Lauren picked up the pages, her eyes moving across the text. Daniel stood beside her, silent. "They were in a dog bowl," Ellen said, her voice calm, factual. "They're listed in my family estate documents. They're going into a display case at church and then into secured storage." Lauren set the pages down. "You could have just asked." "I'm not asking. I'm retrieving it." There was a long silence. Lauren's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Ellen finished packing the last pieces, sealed both boxes, and carried them to the front door. Then she returned to the dining room with the department store bag. "I brought these for you," she said, setting the bag on the table. 12 plates, 12 bowls, dishwasher safe. Practical for everyday use. She unpacked the stoneware and stacked it neatly in the cabinet where the china had been. Lauren watched without speaking. When Ellen finished, she picked up her boxes and walked to the door. "Goodbye," she said. Daniel followed her to the car and helped load the boxes into the back seat. The teapot rode in the passenger footwell, wrapped in a towel Ellen had brought specifically for that purpose. "Mom," Daniel said as she opened the driver's door. She turned. "You did this right," he said quietly. She nodded. "Now you know." On Sunday morning, the china sat in the fellowship hall's glass display case under a small printed card, Rosa M's wedding china, 1928. On loan to the family archive, Ellen stood beside the case during coffee hour and spoke to 2 women from the congregation who asked about the set. She told them about her grandmother's hands, how she worked as a seamstress, how she saved for 2 years to buy the china for her wedding. She didn't mention the dog bowl. She didn't need to. Pastor Ruth locked the case after coffee hour and handed Ellen a sign-in sheet. I'll note the dates, she said. It's beautiful. Thank you. By July, the family archive trust documents were filed with the county. The china and 3 other heirlooms, her mother's wedding ring, a hand-stitched quilt, and a photograph album from 1942, were listed by name and stored in the safe deposit box. The structure was in place. The language was clear. There were consequences, as there always are when boundaries are drawn with precision instead of hope. For 3 weeks, Lauren didn't respond to Ellen's texts. When she did, the replies were short single words, no punctuation. Daniel called at odd hours, his voice careful, asking how she was doing. Ellen told him she was fine. She told him to take the time he needed. In early August, the church hosted a veterans memorial service, and a member asked to display his father's military medals in the case beside the china. Ellen attended the service and stood near the display afterward. Daniel came alone. He stood with his hands in his pockets, reading the small cards beneath each item. You did this right, he said without looking at her. I needed to. I should have noticed. You were busy. Now you see it. He nodded. They stood in silence for a moment, then he left. At home, Ellen rewrote the memorandum of tangible property with painful specificity. She added clauses. No heirloom is to be used for pet feeding, garage storage, outdoor display, or any purpose inconsistent with its historical and familial value. Items may be loaned only with written terms, a specified return date, and photographic documentation of condition. She printed 3 copies. One went into the safe deposit box. One went into her desk drawer. The third she left on her kitchen counter for 1 week, where she saw it every time she made tea or washed a dish. The paper became a kind of anchor. When she found herself rehearsing arguments in the shower, conversations that hadn't happened, defenses she would never need, she turned the water to cool and counted to 30. By mid-September, the rehearsals had faded. In late September, Ellen found the missing sugar bowl lid. She had been searching online estate sale listings for months, and one Saturday afternoon, a small antique shop an hour south posted a photo of a lid that matched. She drove there the next morning. The shop owner, a man in his late 60s with careful hands, lifted the lid from its shelf and turned it over. The maker's mark was identical. The gold rim was slightly worn but intact. You're the second person to ask about this in a year, he said. Did the first person buy it? No. They wanted a full set. You just need the lid. Yes. He wrapped it in soft tissue paper and placed it in a small box. You're careful with these things. I learned from someone, Ellen said. On the drive home, she stopped at a park and sat on a bench near a pond. The leaves had just started to turn yellow at the edges, still green at the core. She ate a sandwich she'd packed and watched 2 children throw bread to the ducks. The air smelled like cut grass and distant rain. She thought of her grandmother, who had worked long days at a sewing machine in a room with 1 window, who had saved coins in a jar, who had chosen china not because it was expensive but because it was hers. The trust felt less like a wall and more like a fence around a small garden. 2 weeks later, Daniel called and asked if she was free for dinner. Lauren wants to talk, he said. Ellen arrived at their house on a Thursday evening. The table was set with the stoneware, plain, practical, sturdy. Ruby slept in the hallway, her head on her paws. Lauren met Ellen at the door and gestured toward the table. We made soup, she said. They sat. The soup was chicken and vegetables, simple and warm. For a while, no one spoke. Then Lauren set her spoon down. We've been talking, she said. About what happened. Daniel nodded. Lauren looked at Ellen. I'm sorry. I didn't understand the weight of it. Ellen met her gaze. Thank you. They ate quietly after that. The stoneware clinked softly against the table. No one mentioned the display case or the trust or the dog bowl. It was better that way. By October, the rhythm of their weeks returned, quieter and more deliberate than before. Ellen and Daniel met for coffee on Saturday mornings. The trust folder sat in her desk, unopened for weeks at a time. At church, the display case rotated its contents, quilts in September, photographs in October, a collection of vintage hymnals in November. But every few months, by request, china returned. People asked about it. Ellen told the same two stories: the seamstress, the savings, the wedding in 1928. Ellen also began writing in a small spiral notebook she labeled for Emma, her granddaughter, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, who was 11 and lived with her mother in Columbus. Emma visited twice a month and liked to bake with Ellen, measuring flour exactly, reading recipes aloud in a serious voice. In the front pocket of the notebook, Ellen placed a printed copy of the memorandum and a photograph of the teapot, sunlight catching the curve of its spout. She wrote a note on the inside cover. Some things carry more than food. They carry time. Be exact with them. She didn't know if Emma would read it now or in 20 years. It didn't matter. The words were there. One detail remained unspoken. Ellen never told Daniel that Victor had sent a brief, formal letter to Lauren in late July, just a single paragraph, printed on his firm's letterhead, outlining the trust terms and the legal definition of custody and care. No accusations. No demands. Just language, clean and clear. Lauren had called Victor's office once, asked 2 questions, and then thanked him. That was all. Victor told Ellen about it over coffee one morning in August. She understood, he said. Good. You didn't need the trust, you know. You could have just taken them. I needed the structure. Not for her. For me. He nodded. Fair enough. By November, Ellen had developed a small ritual. Once a month, she drove to the bank and opened her safe deposit box. She didn't remove anything. She simply slid the drawer out, looked at the envelope, and then slid it back. Before locking it, she rested her palm on the cool metal for a moment, waiting until the faint echo in the small room went still. It was not a triumph. It was not a relief. It is the quiet that comes after a door is closed properly, after a latch clicks into place, after something fragile is set down on a surface that will hold it. She thought of her grandmother's hands lifting a plate, setting it down, the motion so practiced it was nearly invisible. She thought of the way her grandmother had wrapped each piece in newspaper at the end of every holiday, the sound of paper folding, the care that required no audience. Ellen locked the box, pocketed the key, and walked back into the daylight. The November air was sharp and clear. She had no plans for the afternoon. She would go home, maybe start a pot of soup, maybe call Daniel and see if Emma wanted to visit over the weekend. The china sat in its metal drawer, wrapped and named and protected. The house was quiet. The room was clean. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was holding anything alone. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.